Okay, so without further ado, let's make a start. Good afternoon, Mr. Jenkins. It's a pleasure to have you here today. We are two representatives from a student-led social enterprise, Kita, whose goal is to improve job prospects for young Indonesian high school students and motivate them to achieve their dream careers. And we are so honored to be able to interview you today about your exciting role as the British ambassador to Indonesia. So, if you don't mind, let's go back to the beginning. Did you ever imagine yourself being a diplomat, and what led you to pursue it?
Yeah, I don't think I did really. When I was growing up and going to school and university, I knew that I wanted a career that would let me travel, that would let me see the world and talk to different people. And I've always been interested in politics, but it was only when I was leaving university that I really came across diplomacy as a career. It wasn't something that I was familiar with when I was growing up. I grew up in the UK. We didn't have friends who were diplomats. So it was really when I discovered that this existed that I thought, yeah, that's the right career for me. And that was 32 years ago, and I'm still here.
That's surprising, 32 years. Okay, so our next question would you say the process to becoming a diplomat is different for everyone? Like, what are the standards, certifications, or qualifications required for this important position?
So it's very different in different countries. Each country has its own process for recruiting diplomats into its foreign service, and they can be very, very different, one to the other. For the UK, we put a lot of emphasis on transferable skills. So things like communication skills, some quantitative skills, ability to read data, media skills, but a lot around people, a lot around literacy, articulate use of language, and so on. Other countries put more emphasis on technical skills like foreign languages, international law, economics, and so on. So it really depends which country's foreign service your clients, if I can call them that, are looking to join. So it's worth looking in quite a lot of detail at what your country would need. I think, though, what every diplomatic service is looking for is somebody who can engage confidently and convincingly with a whole range of people. So I meet people from all walks of life doing all sorts of different things, and the ability just to talk to them and hopefully influence them to do things which are of mutual benefit, I think is the key skill for a diplomat.
So it's lovely to hear that it's not, at least for the UK, such a specific or rigid set of qualifications, and anybody could have the potential if they worked hard enough to build those skills. So you mentioned that you joined this career because you wanted to travel and meet different people and build yourself as a person. So you must have had a very rich background, especially since you've been in this career for 30 odd years, which is very impressive. So what previous posts and positions have you held, and how did this support your journey into becoming the British ambassador specifically for Indonesia?
Sure. So I've had a pretty varied career. I've spent about half of it in London at the headquarters, the Foreign Ministry there, and about half of it abroad. That's a normal sort of balance. My postings have been all around the world. So my first posting was in Turkey, and I speak Turkish, and 3.5 years there. I was then back in London for a bit. Then I had 4 years in Argentina, 3 years in Brussels at the UK's representation to the EU. 3 years in India, and then back to London again until I came out to Indonesia in 2019. So it's been quite a varied set of countries. I think they're connected by the fact that most of them are the emerging powers of the 21st century. That, I mean, if you look across the likes of Turkey, of Argentina, of India, of Indonesia, these are countries which are really on the up, which are really emerging into the spotlight, I think, in an incredibly positive way. And that's what's fascinated me, that change, that dynamism of international relations. So how have those postings helped me? I mean, I think just the variety has meant that I've been able to engage with a whole range of different sorts of people and activities. In India, I was working on climate change and energy issues. But in Argentina, I was working on economics and press issues. While I was in Turkey, I was working on domestic politics, human rights, and internal security issues primarily, and everything else around that. So I think that breadth has been a great preparation to be an ambassador, actually, because obviously here in Indonesia, we have a fantastic and a fantastically broad relationship with Indonesia. And so the ability to talk about everything from trade to investment to climate change to security to geopolitics, I think is an essential thing for me.
And you mentioned that you repeatedly mentioned that you learned a breadth of information and skills across, which I feel, which is of course very important, but it also leads to my very nice into my next question, which is, what are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered in your career as a diplomat, and how did you overcome them? Because surely these breadth of skills, there may be some which are your weaknesses, for example.
That's very insightful, and you're absolutely right. I don't know if I want to admit to my weaknesses, but you are quite right. So some of the biggest challenges, they do come when you're confronting a situation which is new or which is very different to ones you've faced before, and you have to do what the transferable skills require you to do, which is transfer and shift and think about a new problem, but using the skills that you've developed. So I found that very heavily in my last job when I was the British Prime Minister's Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. So I spent a lot of time going to Kabul, a lot of time in Islamabad and elsewhere, working with people who were thinking about the challenges of Afghanistan. That was all very new. It was a very senior role. It was my first really senior role. And I was engaging at presidential level and at ministerial level in a whole range of countries. And I think what I needed to remember was that actually that felt very new, very challenging, because suddenly you're sitting opposite a president and you're having to deal at that level. But actually the skills which you need to do that are the same as the skills that you need to engage with anybody. Of course, it needs to be respectful, it needs to be thoughtful, it needs to recognize what they're saying. It needs to be based on listening, not just transmitting what I want to say. And actually, those are the same skills that I had when I was a junior diplomat working in Turkey, sitting across the room from, I don't know, a Turkish businessman or a police chief or something. So I think having that confidence and feeling actually my career has brought me to this point, and it has given me the things that I need, even though this feels new and different and difficult. I have the skills, I have the confidence to take myself forward in that conversation, and I hope I did.
That's wonderful to hear. So we know that you've had such a variety of roles in so many different countries and have built so many transferable skills along the way, and you must have a very hectic work day. So could you give us perhaps a summary of the tasks you've done in a regular day, or perhaps maybe something you did yesterday or this week?
Sure. Yeah, and this is the pleasure of it. So the things that, just a few examples. It won't be a typical single day, but the things that I've done this week. For example, this morning I was doing a series of TV interviews on the invasion of Ukraine. So I was talking to Metro TV, TV1, Kompas TV, and others about that very serious, very difficult conversation. Yesterday, I was launching a guidebook to the UK, IOCA UK, with Astindo, the biggest travel agents association in Indonesia, and a lot of social media influencers, talking in a much more high energy, sort of enthusiastic way about the positives in that relationship. Also yesterday, I was talking to colleagues from the Indonesian Foreign Ministry about shared challenges that we face. And earlier in the week, I had some meetings with British business people who want to invest in Indonesia and export their goods and services to Indonesia. Alongside that, of course, there is the normal sort of office business that, I'm, as well as being sort of the ambassador in a representational sense, I run an embassy which has 140 staff and a reasonably significant budget. So, I'm running, not a huge organization, but an organization which takes care and which takes some attention to keep running smoothly and make sure that my colleagues have everything they need to do their jobs. So it's a real mix, and the external engagement, as I hope I've shown, is very varied in all of the fields that we cover. But there is that internal piece as well, which is perhaps less obvious to the people who will be listening to this. The fact that the embassy needs management, it needs leadership, and that's what I'm here to do as well.
So those are quite a lot of unexpected responsibilities, which is not really known to students who would be looking into the diplomat position. But one thing which I would like to ask is, as a diplomat, you must have had to travel a lot, as shown as what you said previously to Turkey, to India, and now to Indonesia. With COVID impacting everyone for the past 2 years, how has this impacted your job, and how did you adapt to these restrictions?
Really good question. And I think 2 years ago, sort of January, February 2020, we were all panicked because, diplomacy is about personal relationships. It's about engaging people. And that's, I don't think any of us knew how to do that online, or at least consistently online. And I think since then, we've learned a lot about what really works online. And there are some things which I and the embassy does better online than we did previously. So, for example, we run a scholarship scheme for Indonesia, the Chevening Scholarship Scheme, which funds Indonesian students to go and do master's degrees in the UK. And we've always struggled with the reach across Indonesia. Indonesia is such a huge and diverse country that making sure that people from Aceh to Papua, from Sulawesi to Sumbar and Java know about this scheme. That's a real challenge. So we used to run roadshows, we used to go out into the different provinces. And then COVID hit, and of course we couldn't do any of that. So we did it all online. And then we discovered that actually that's much better, that we were able to reach many more universities much more quickly. And we got a better range of students, a better diversity of students applying for the scheme. So those sorts of things, and some of the public speeches that I've done have been much more effective. I did a general lecture with the Ministry of Transport a few months ago, where they invited all of their educational institutes. So they have polytechnics on maritime affairs, which I think is in Manado. They have an aviation school. They have a land transport and railway school. They have 14, I think, institutes. All of them could join the same speech, and we could have a conversation about transport policy. Again, impossible in an offline world. So those things have really worked well, and we'll keep doing them. But some of the things which diplomats do, the sort of quiet, private conversations over coffee or over a meal with senior colleagues, whether other ambassadors or Indonesian colleagues, that still, I still miss that, and we're just getting back to that now, I think. So we will go back to a hybrid world, I hope, keeping the things which work really well for diplomats, but also reclaiming that personal diplomacy, which is a lot of what we do.
Thank you for that answer. And it's great to see that, I'm sure COVID, it all hit us in a devastating way. Some communities were hit harder than others, but it's great to see that we've all learned something, and we can all be a lot more productive actually with that hybrid environment that you mentioned. So as an ambassador to Indonesia, I'm sure you've had to be fluent in Bahasa Indonesia itself, and you mentioned that you're fluent in Turkish as well, which is amazing. And I'm sure there are many other skills you've had to build, which you've kind of touched on as well. But what kind of skills does an ambassador is an ambassador expected to have, other than being able to speak local languages?
Ya, kalau untuk bahasa Indonesia saya belum lancar, tapi ya setiap minggu ada kelas bahasa Indonesia di sini di Kedutaan Besar. Pelan-pelan saya belajar. So I try to learn languages, and I like learning languages because I think it's a link to people which you don't get if you just speak English. And being British, I think we can get very lazy and not speak local languages. So I've really made an effort wherever I've been. As well as that, I mean, I've talked a bit about the interpersonal skills and the transferable skills which the British Foreign Service particularly looks for. But there are also those technical and practical skills that one needs. So my own academic background is in English literature. So my first degree was in English literature and language, which is great for using language and the communication, but it doesn't teach you much about economics or international law or international politics. So I've worked over my career to try and build those levels of expertise, and the British Foreign Office has been pretty good at trying to encourage that. So it sent me and colleagues off to Cambridge, for example, to do a week-long intensive course in international law with some of the world's leading experts on treaties and so on. It gave me a full week economics course focused on the specific sort of international economic skills that a diplomat would need. That was before I went to Argentina, and so on. So there are specific sort of skills-based courses and knowledge-based courses which the British Foreign Office runs for its own staff to try and upskill us to make sure that we stay current in the things that we know. And that's a real pleasure. I think one of the nice things about a diplomat or being a diplomat is that you're always learning something new, that there's always something you don't know. And you asked earlier about key skills for a diplomat, and perhaps the one I didn't mention is curiosity. That if you don't want to know, if you don't want to learn, then really why are you going to another country when that's the key thing you need to have?
So a lot sorry, but you mentioned all of these different skills, and of course they're key, but let's say somebody who's new to this position and they've just entered an entry-level position as a diplomat, what should they expect to encounter on, let's say, their first day or first year on the job?
So a new diplomat, first of all, usually they'll come into the headquarters. So they won't start by going to an embassy. They'll start by coming into the foreign ministry, whether that's in London or Jakarta or Paris or wherever. And usually they'll start as a junior desk officer. So what they'll be doing is mostly preparing papers, working out policy positions, making recommendations to more senior diplomats. But even there, they'll start to engage with diplomats from embassies in their capital. So when I first joined the Foreign Office back in the 90s, I was working on European security. So I was doing all of this policy preparation and work on papers for my seniors. But I was also going out and meeting colleagues from the German embassy, for example, who were interested in the same things, or from the American embassy or whatever, to try to inform what I was thinking and to get their views and make sure that I included that in the policy papers I was preparing. And then gradually, as you get more and more senior, I think the balance tips. So you're doing less internal work and you're doing more external engagement, because you're now that senior person who has the knowledge and hopefully the skills to influence and to engage and to talk to the range of people you need to. So it does change over time, but at the beginning, it mostly is that. And I think there's another, and in a way, you start as a new diplomat, you go to HQ, but then when you have your first posting overseas, it's like starting again, because suddenly you're in a very different job, and being a diplomat abroad is very different from being a diplomat at home when you're a civil servant, you're writing papers, you're doing policy. When you're abroad, suddenly you're supposed to be out there. You're supposed to be getting to know the country or the organisation you're posted to, and that's a very different challenge, and that can be quite an abrupt transition for young diplomats.
Thank you for your answer to that question. So let's say if you were to interview young aspiring diplomats, just as I'm sure you were 32 years ago, what would make them stand out? What would make you think, wow, this person deserves the job?
Enthusiasm and curiosity, I think, are the two things that I would really look for, and an ability to communicate those things. So much of it is about communication skills. But I think I would want to see somebody who really had that passion for trying to understand the world, wanting to connect with cultures and people and ideas which were unfamiliar to them, who wasn't sort of stuck in a box thinking, well, this is the British way of doing things and therefore this is the right way of doing things, because that's just hopeless if you're out in the world. and curiosity. So I would be looking for somebody who had shown in their previous experience that they'd done those things, that they'd taken opportunities to go out and learn and do different things. So, I think when I was being interviewed, when I was young, I'd spent some time before university teaching English in Brazil, for example. I was a terrible English teacher, which is why I'm now a diplomat. And then, when I was at university, I took the opportunity of an exchange program and went to study in the United States for a year, which I didn't have to do, but the opportunity was there. And like I say, I just wanted to be out there. And I think looking for people who've, not necessarily that done those things, but taken their own opportunities to learn and to engage with the world, I think that would be much more persuasive to me than somebody who just comes to me and says, well, I've spent all my time living in London, but actually I'm really enthusiastic about the world. I'm really interested in it. Well, you haven't really shown that. There has to be that sense of initiative that they've done something because that's their passion, rather than just telling me that that's their passion.
Sorry, Alessia, go ahead.
Okay, so, diplomats, based off what you've already told us this entire interview, you have very intensive work throughout your week. How do you balance this with your free time, with your personal time, and with friends? How do you get this work-life balance, essentially?
It's really tough, frankly, particularly when you're abroad. And I learn now, particularly when you're an ambassador, because you're always an ambassador. I can't, as long as I'm in Indonesia, this is who I am. And if I go to the mall and do something silly, it's the British ambassador doing that. It's not Owen Jenkins. So I think there always needs to be an awareness that when you're posted in a country, you're representing your own country, and therefore there's a certain standard of behaviour which is expected, and that can be a constraint on personal life and on family life. But I think what I've found is that it's just important to have things which take you out of your role and do different things. So, and they can be different in different places. So I've always liked mountain sports. I enjoy mountaineering and rock climbing. That's harder to do in Indonesia, so I've taken up scuba diving and also golf, slightly less adventurous, but still quite fun. But important, I think, to have things which you have to concentrate on. That if you're scuba diving, you need to concentrate on that. You can't be thinking about the conversation that you had last week with a business person about the next thing, because otherwise you'll do something wrong and drown. So having something which you enjoy and which takes you out of that is really helpful. And my family keep me really grounded as well. So the fact that they're here with me, that when I go home, they don't let me just chunter on about work. They'll want me to do other things as well. I think that's really positive.
That's so great to hear that you have a strong support system and you've managed to find other things that keep you engaged. So my next question would be, since you mentioned that communication between local communities and you as kind of an envoy or a persona for representing your own country, which is obviously a big role to take on, I'm sure there have been instances where perhaps local communities have maybe not perceived you so positively, especially since the British Empire was such a strong force in many Asian countries as well, which you've worked in. So how have you dealt with that? How have you made locals perceive you positively?
So the first thing I think is understanding. So I didn't mention this earlier, but I think a knowledge of history is really crucial, particularly for British diplomats. I was posted in India and Argentina, both countries with strong histories with the UK, some positive, some less so. And you have to know about that because that everybody in the country you're going to will. So there's no excuse for not reading, for not working on history. And when I was the director for South Asia issues back in the Foreign Office in London, I took all of my team, the whole directorate, down to Oxford University for a day to talk to experts there on colonial history and to understand what that meant and how that impacted, how the British role in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and so on impacted on our role now, that we need to understand that. And I found that as long as we do that, as long as we know our own history and what it meant for the country that we're in, that we engage respectfully on those issues, that you can have a conversation about it, that it's not always something where we'll reach an agreement, of course. That's normal, and diplomats are constantly finding things we don't agree on. That's our job in a way, is to find them and work through them. But I've always been able to talk about them with my interlocutors, and I think that historical knowledge and understanding is key, and then respect and a listening approach when you come to that conversation, I think is really important, and understand why it matters to the people you're talking to. So it's tough, and I think I found that that's something again which perhaps I wasn't expecting when I first entered the service, but it's something I've really learned, and now I feel very, very strongly. So we run, just again anecdotally, we run a course here which is sort of foundation level in international affairs for all of our staff. Anybody who wants it, whether they're Indonesian, British, or whatever, can take that. It's a series of modules. And I insisted on teaching the sort of colonial history module myself, because I think it's so important. We may see ourselves now as this sort of European power, still a very important country in the world. But 100 years ago, we were something very different, and that's made a huge difference to the world, and that's how people perceive us, and understandably so.
It's very touching and heartwarming to see that despite the history of the past, you've made a conscious effort to understand local communities, and I'm sure that's a crucial skill as part of your diplomacy. So we're on to our final question of the interview. What's a moment, like just an anecdotal moment that you could provide us with that made you realize the impact of your job and made you proud to be representing your country?
There've been a number of moments. That's the joy of this job, is that it's full of memorable things. So I'll pick two of them, if I may. One was here in Indonesia. So whenever a new ambassador comes to a country, he brings a letter from his head of state, his or her head of state, to present to the head of state of the country they're being posted to. So I arrived with a letter from Queen Elizabeth II to give to President Jokowi. And I went to the presidential palace, and there was a military guard of honor. They were playing our national anthem. I went into the palace and I met President Jokowi, and I handed over this letter from Her Majesty the Queen. And that was an amazing thing, to be able to do that, to feel that you are representing such a weight of tradition, of history, to such an amazing country like Indonesia. That's just a fantastic feeling. I loved it. And then sometimes there are work moments when you feel that as well. In my last role, I was working particularly on Afghanistan-Pakistan relations, as I mentioned. And at one point, through a series of events which I won't outline, I ended up negotiating an agreement between, I had in the room the Pakistani foreign minister and the Afghan national security advisor, and I was sort of chairing this meeting where they were talking about how they would agree to stop shelling each other and to have a border agreement. I mean, that was an amazing privilege to be able to be in a position where lives could be saved. You could do something which would actually allow a border to be open and to be safe. How much effect it had with what's happened in Afghanistan recently, I don't know. But just to be in that position where you have the chance to make a difference is a huge privilege.
All right. So as we're nearing the end of our time with Ambassador Jenkins, I would like to say thank you for giving up your valuable time to be with us today and answering questions about the incredible career you lead as the British Ambassador to Indonesia. For people who are listening, stay tuned for more insightful interviews on our website and sneak peeks on our Instagram. at imliquida.edu.id. And once again, thank you, Mr. Jenkins, for attending our interview. We hope you have a great day.
Not at all. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to have had the chance to talk. Thank you very much.